Hello and welcome to Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast, where you can hear AI researchers chat about what's going on with AI. As usual, in this episode, we'll provide summaries, a discussion of last week's most interesting AI news. You can also check out our Last Week in AI newsletter at lastweekin.ai for articles we both did and did not cover in this episode. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Sharon Zhou.
And I am your other host, Andrei Kurenkov. I'm just going to give a quick summary of what we'll touch on. We'll go into how Hugging Face raised a bunch of money, some new features that Google has announced that are powered by AI. We'll cover some research on breaking down plastic with new enzymes and new progress in robotics. We'll talk about the EU AI Act and its various facets, and also Clearview AI being banned from selling its facial recognition software to many AI companies. And as usual, we'll finish up with some fun stuff with a new music video from Kendrick Lamar that uses deepfakes and a comparison of human drawings versus AI-generated drawings. So, exciting episode.
Exciting indeed.
And let's get going. First up, as usual, we'll discuss applications and business, starting off with the story Hugging Face reaches $2 billion valuation to build the GitHub of machine learning. So if you're any sort of software engineer using AI in the last few years, you probably already know of Hugging Face. It has a bit of an interesting history. It started off building a sort of chatbot app or messaging app. And then that sort of didn't go anywhere, but they released a really popular package on GitHub, a software package that really made it easier to develop things in natural language processing. And since then, they've expanded their tools to a whole bunch of different things. They have a sort of repository of pre-trained machine learning models that are very easy to import into your code. They also have sort of live demos of things, and a whole sort of community aspect. So they've raised 100 million Series C from a few different companies. They already have a bunch of investors and are now valued at $2 billion. Pretty exciting. Yeah, this article is saying the GitHub of machine learning, and that's kind of true. And I think, a lot of AI researchers, AI developers really do like what Hugging Face is doing.
It's kind of crazy to look at Hugging Face and to think back on all the code that, I had written, you had written, and now it's just a line of code. Of course, it's not always a line of code to really, get it out there beyond just playing with it. Sometimes it does take a lot more than a line of code and a lot of finagling as well. But that being said, Hugging Face has really enabled a lot of great work, and companies also hit their APIs very easily instead of building out everything again and again. It's great to see how far they've gotten. I will say that people obviously have talked about whether there is a questionable business model here. Of course, GitHub somehow managed to get where it is, and GitLab as well. GitHub being acquired by Microsoft, but GitLab really, taking it to IPO. So we'll see where Hugging Face goes with this.
Yeah. Apparently 10,000 companies are already using it in one way or another. So it's definitely pretty popular, but a lot of this is not being charged. It's open source or it's just free to use. But they do seem to be growing. I've seen a lot of tweets of people joining Hugging Face lately. So definitely a cool company to keep track of.
And on to our next article. Google ups the AI ante with new features for voice assistant, maps, and more. This is a long article about all the different features Google has released across Google Voice, Google Lens, Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Translate. So one capability is being able to search within a scene, and that enables Google Voice Search and Google Lens to allow people to just point at an object with their phones or use live images coupled with text to define a search query. So it allows basically us to understand the world in a way that we can, easily figure out what we want, but also get our devices to see the world in this multimodal way, which is looking at, text or live images all at once. So, for example, one person this post said he recently bought a cactus for his home office, and then it began withering. So he took a picture of it, and at the same time searched for care instructions to bring it back to life, so he can put into the search engine both an image and text. And so this is all around multimodal understanding, which is really now coming to the masses if Google is really rolling this out. So being able to be able to scan all sorts of types of images across different languages for people to do that is really quite incredible. I'm curious to see what people actually use it for. I've been thinking about, I'm not actually quite sure what I would use it for, but maybe it's, taking a picture of something and then asking something specific about it or drilling down into what I'm taking a picture of. I guess it's whichever modality is easier to explain something. Maybe you don't know the name of something, so you can just only take a picture.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This is something that really hasn't existed. And as you say, I think it's not obvious how you would use it, compared to just Googling stuff based on images or text. But it's pretty impressive that they are actually implementing it. And some of the other things announced, I was also quite impressed with. So, for instance, they're making it so for Google Assistant, you no longer have to say, "Hey, Google," or any sort of activation phrase. They, included a bunch of models that check for proximity, head orientation, gaze detection, user phrasing, voice, and stuff. So it basically understands when you're talking to it without you activating it. So kind of how humans would understand what you're talking to them, right? So that's kind of really, really good, I would say. Really makes this more useful. And they also added an additional 24 new languages to Google Translate, bringing their total to 133. And these new ones are spoken by more than 300 million people worldwide. So, yeah, it's, recently, I think Sundar Pichai said that Google is not mobile first, it's AI first as a company. And it definitely seems like they are working on all sorts of stuff using AI.
Yeah, this is pretty exciting to see Google launch a lot of these features, since it does touch on, a lot of people and a lot of lives. It's cool to see Google Translate being rolled out to many, many more languages, since actually it doesn't touch on a lot of languages. Actually, roughly 6,000 languages are not supported. And that doesn't touch a big fraction of the world. And yeah, so I'm excited to see how Google rolls out these features. It's really not easy to go from research to deployment, and so seeing this actually happening, from Google, which does so much research internally, is exciting. Also speaks to kind of the lag time of things.
Yeah, I think as far as companies go, Google has really been one of the faster ones to do this translation. I know they implemented neural translation models to Google Translate pretty quickly. And now they're doing multimodal functionality, and we've only really cracked multimodality, take text and images in the last couple of years. So I think it's pretty impressive how fast they commercialize these really advanced or recent techniques. And it does speak to how much they prioritize it.
And onto our lightning round. First article is how machine learning is speeding up Formula One. So machine learning is now key to helping Formula One races, those teams for Formula One races, to succeed on the track. But its use actually in the sport extends beyond that. And the article touches on how machine learning is currently being used to improve engagement experiences of fans and this is by Amazon. The next article is China to build AI-powered 3D printed hydroelectric dam in Tibet. And this is a project on the Tibetan plateau that's aimed to build a hydroelectric dam using AI and 3D printing in just 2 years. And according to reports, the dam will be constructed entirely by AI-powered robots, which will act as a giant 3D printer to build the 180-meter structure layer by layer. We may have to dive into that at some other point on clickbait. That
yeah. I mean, yeah, it's maybe not quite as impressive as it sounds, but having a bunch of AI-powered robots collaborate as a sort of printer does sound pretty cool, and I'd like to see how that looks. And on to our other lightning round stories. We have Intel debuts new chips for AI workloads, data center, and acceleration and laptops. So Intel expanded its product portfolio with several new chips, including an AI processor that promises to provide twice the performance of NVIDIA Corp's flagship A100 graphics card.
All right, let's go. Competition.
Let's get it.
We're not even competition. Just we all need more GPUs. We don't really care where it's coming from.
Yeah, more compute, please. And then our last story here is 62.5 million Fundraise value self-checkout system Mashgin at 1.5 billion. So Mashgin creates a touchless self-checkout system powered by AI and specifically computer vision. So it basically sees what you have in your cart and can recognize it without needing to scan a barcode. And now in their Series B, they, got the 60 million and their valuation has gone up. So another unicorn. Do unicorns matter anymore? I don't know. But
unicorns even big nowadays.
It's all about the decacorns.
I know. It's really crazy.
Yeah. Alrighty, and on to our research and advancements stories, where we cover some papers usually. So first up, we have an article from Vice titled "Scientists Discover Method to Break Down Plastic in Days, Not Centuries." And this is an article that kind of summarizes a recent Nature paper titled "Machine Learning Aided Engineering of Hydrolysis for PAT Depolymerization," which is a bit of a mouthful, but actually the article explains it fairly well. So a group of scientists at the University of Texas at Austin have used a machine learning technique to create a modified enzyme that can, as the article says, break down plastics in days instead of centuries. And what this is focused on, this very common form of plastic, polyethylene terephthalate, which is PET. And this is a synthetic resin used in fibers for clothing and plastic that overall accounts for 12% of global waste. So it's a pretty big deal. And so they used an algorithm which was fed with 19,000 protein structures and taught it to predict the positions of amino acids in the structure that are not optimized for their local environment. Basically, they used a combination of models to both model potential solutions and then kind of evaluate them to be efficient and also robust. So their enzyme titled FAST-PETase, which is an acronym from Functional, Active, Stable, and Tolerant PETase, is really nice for several reasons. One of them is that it can work in a variety of environments. So similar enzymes often are limited to temperatures or acidity, and this one is more kind of robust in various situations. So yeah, really pretty exciting work.
To dive into the network a little bit more, it's a 3-dimensional ConvNet, and it's specifically has just 9 layers, so a pretty small one actually, divided into 2 different blocks. They say feature extraction and classification. That's pretty typical of what a ConvNet would do. And so this is pretty basic model, but getting at a very interesting problem.
Yeah, and so they already have some demonstrations in the paper that this is usable and sort of works on things like plastic bottles. And now, this is not kind of the end of it. Now they must test with Enzyme on a wide range of different types of PET plastics found in the waste stream of the real world, and detritus that's found in plastic bottles and things like that. And should they actually demonstrate that this can be used practically, the researchers believe that it could help tackle the billions of tons of waste in our environment. So clearly we need to address plastic pollution and waste better. It's a real problem. And so hopefully this is a real, scientific contribution towards that problem.
And on to our next article. This deep learning technique solves one of the tough challenges of robotics. So this article is about DiffSkill, which is a new technique that uses neural networks to learn simple skills for robotics, specifically for deformable bodies or deformable objects, such as a piece of dough or fabrics that might have infinite degrees of freedom and so rigid objects, in contrast, will have, various degrees of freedom, but also they have a finite set of numbers that can maybe describe the state of that rigid object. But a piece of dough or fabric might have like really infinite ways of representing its state. And so that makes it very hard to model mathematically.
Yeah. So the paper here is titled DiffSkill, Skill Abstraction from Differentiable Physics for Deformable Object Manipulation with Tools. And the article here says solves one of the tough challenges of robotics. So for context, manipulating deformable objects is one of the big kind of difficult things because it's pretty hard to simulate. And, obviously, unlike rigid objects, deformable objects are sort of kind of tricky. They change in shape. So you really have to have a better set of manipulation skills. And so here they have this Plasticine Lab, a differentiable physics simulator that was actually developed last year. And they used that to be able to optimize tool usage and combine that for things like dough manipulation, which is actually pretty cool.
And I think just diving one level deeper into the paper and what they're doing, they're doing two different things. And the first stage of things is that they use a differentiable physics simulator to generate different training examples to learn how to abstract different skills. So be able to say like, hey, this is one skill, that's another skill, be able to, separate those out and kind of plan that. So the skill abstractor will need to predict whether a desired goal is going to be feasible or not, the goal of manipulating the dough in a certain way. And then the second step actually requires training of VAE, a variational autoencoder. And that's to learn this latent space representation, which is what a VAE does, of these generated samples by the physics simulator. And so the VAE is trying to encode these images, the viewpoint from the robot is like these images of this dough changing while it's manipulating it. And also specifically, they're applying domain randomization, which is a common technique now to try to abstract out, different aspects of the background and really focus on representing what exactly, the objects, what exactly is happening. So not caring about, the color of the dough or anything like that. And so the author said that diff skill using these two steps was able to solve quote long horizon tasks, and they tested it on dough manipulation as a task, which is quite fun. So the AI agent must lift the dough with a spatula, place it on a cutting board, and also spread it with a roller. So do multiple steps and with multiple different types of tools. And also, optimization is really important, so it could be done efficiently in around 10 seconds for each skill combination on a single 2080 GPU.
Yeah, so pretty fun. It's definitely kind of a growing subject of interest, deformable objects. And here, some of these things are not too novel, such as, chaining these lower level skills or shorter skills together. That's something that's pretty similar to prior work. So, but yeah, this dough rolling thing is definitely super fun to see in simulation. And they do note in the conclusion that one of the next steps is to actually transfer this to a real robot, which would be pretty fun to see. I would really love to see a robot, make a dumpling or something. So hopefully we're getting closer to that.
Yeah, dough was a great task because everyone just gets a little, hungry from just looking at it.
Yeah.
And on to our lightning round. The first article is researchers now able to predict battery lifetimes with machine learning. And so this is researchers at the US DOE, Department of Energy, the Argonne National Lab specifically, and they've turned to AI to predict the lifetimes of a wide range of different battery chemistries. And they used experimental data gathered at Argonne from a set of 300 batteries representing 6 different battery chemistries. And then the scientists can now accurately determine just how long different batteries will continue to cycle. And this is very, very this is honestly very important work. I did a little bit of this work back in my PhD, and this would be very useful for understanding when to recycle a battery, when a recycled battery can be reused and continue to be used, and it just helps significantly with that. And there's a lot of waste right now.
Good job, Department of Energy.
Yeah. And the next lightning round article is how do patients feel about AI in healthcare? It depends. So this is new research exploring what patients think of AI use in healthcare. This is from Yale University, and they surveyed a nationally representative group of 926 patients about their comfort with the use of AI, what concerns they have, and on their overall opinions.
Yeah, so pretty interesting results here. Like the title says, it depends in a sense that different people are generally pretty comfortable with AI reading chest x-rays, but not comfortable with AI making a cancer diagnosis. Not too surprising, but certainly good to know. And then for our final lightning on story, we have Meta AI, aka Facebook, introduces Make a Scene, a deep generative technique based on a transformer for text to image synthesis with human priors. So a new paper on generating images from text. And this one focuses to really generate scenes as opposed to images. So similar to some stuff we've seen from NVIDIA, you can sort of draw a little scene just with colors and say, this is supposed to be water, this is a boat. And then it's easier, or through that process, you can generate an actual scene that you composed instead of just describing it with text and hoping it works. And in the article, they actually have a little YouTube video that they created, which is really fun, of a kind of children's story where they wrote the text and then they actually created a bunch of images for this children's book. So that's a really fun thing we'll link to.
And drum roll, please. It is time for us to speak deep praise on the very tool that we're using right now to speak to you, which is Zencaster. It is what we use for podcasting, and we do truly love using it. It's saved us many, many times. They have, really good sound, great video. They basically, beyond that, I mean, they save your butt when you lose audio and video tracks during your podcast, which we've been scared of before, but they always had us, always had our back there. There are separate audio video tracks for guests who, are recording or us. And the cloud backup is pretty secure, so you won't ever lose it. Like I said, very easy to use, nothing to download. Guests just can click on a link and we can start recording. So go to zen.ai/lastweekinai and get your 30% off your first 3 months with a pro account.
Yeah, give it a try if you need recording. I really do enjoy having separate tracks to get the best sound quality. Moving on to our society and ethics stories. First off, we have a quick guide to the most important AI law you've never heard of from the Technology Review. Maybe we have heard of this one, I don't know, but it's a really nice article basically summarizing what's going on with the EU AI Act. So it is kind of the first big law that aims to curb the harms of potential AI products by regulating the whole sector. And it's pretty ambitious. So it, as I think we discussed before, has things like extra checks for high-risk uses of AI. So that's something like grading exams, recruiting, helping judges. It also would restrict law enforcement agencies' use of facial recognition, and kind of a lot of things on that sort. So if they manage to pull it off, it would certainly be one of the strongest available regulations of AI, maybe only comparable to China, which we've discussed a bit before. Certainly much more ambitious than anything that's been done at the US. And in the US, it's mostly been state and city level and not anything federal.
Yeah, the EU is really ahead. One specific thing I thought was interesting was the bill requires people to be notified when they encounter deepfakes, biometric recognition systems, or AI applications that claim to be able to read their emotions. So these are three specific categories that we've touched upon many times in our podcast, and do touch upon, like, these applications do typically cause some ethical quandaries to happen. So it does make sense that they targeted these three. So I find that one very interesting detail there.
Yeah, and we've also discussed how facial recognition has been used to target journalists and protesters, and even led to some false arrest. So that does seem like a really good area to tackle this. And what is also neat is that, similar to the GDPR, the data protection regulations from the EU, the GDPR, once companies were in compliance with it, it sort of got exported to other countries by default, right? Because now that they support it, they could actually have that also for people in the US and so on. So if these protections are in place in the EU, it's hopefully likely that similar sort of capabilities will be imported to the US, and maybe even the US can follow suit with similar regulations.
It'll be still another year before the final text will be, set in stone, and a couple more years before businesses will have to comply. Of course, this adds more red tape for AI companies established in the EU, but the EU is saying, no, this is extremely important, and estimates that actually it would apply to only 5 to 15% of all AI applications. And Of course, like they have been doing, you will fine organizations up to 30 million euros or $31 million. And for companies, actually up to 6% of total worldwide annual revenue, which is pretty huge. And the EU obviously has not been afraid to do that. Amazon was actually fined $775 million in 2021 for breaching GDPR, and Google was fined $4.5 billion in 2018 for breaching antitrust laws.
Yeah, so as the article title says, this really is a very important AI law that's being developed now, and based on GDPR, it probably will take a while to be passed, but it does seem that it is likely to actually eventually come into effect and do at least some of what this suggests, which is encouraging because we're definitely seeing especially facial recognition becoming widespread, and it would be great to have this in the EU, which is all 27 countries and a population of over 447 million people.
And on to our next article. Clearview AI banned from selling its facial recognition software to most US companies. All right, so this is another groundbreaking thing in regulation, but Clearview AI actually agreed to settle a lawsuit from the ACLU that accused the company of basically not following an Illinois law that was banning the use of individuals' biometric data without consent. And so that law, specifically BIPA, Biometric Information Privacy Act, was to protect the Illinois residents' privacy. But the Clearview settlement is actually clearly does set out to help with not only Illinois residents' privacy, but also national individuals' privacy. So this very much sets the cadence for what could be for in national law. And so there is an exception that's made for government contractors, but the company actually can't provide its software to any government contractors or state or local government entities in Illinois for 5 years because of this. They'll also be forced to maintain an opt-out system to allow any Illinois residents to block their likeness from the company's facial search results. A mechanism it must, the company has to spend $50,000 to publicize online. Basically, this is really setting the tone for how the U.S. sees Clearview and, well, specifically Illinois. Clearview obviously tried to spin the settlement as a huge win for the company, claiming its business will not be impacted and that Clearview is happy to end its legal battle with the ACLU. But of course, this does still mean I could also see how this could be a very big win for, privacy, for Clearview to say they can't really do this anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And this doesn't hurt them too much because they are mostly working right now with law enforcement agencies and Homeland Security and the FBI, but still it does set a precedent that's important. And they have been talking about wanting to expand to more sort of public businesses. So this would definitely curb that. And the reason this worked is that Illinois actually has the Biometric Information Privacy Act, which essentially is a pretty clear law application in this sense, where Clearview just collects all these facial recognition or images of faces to put in its database. So it makes a lot of sense this was successful. And another thing I found interesting is that another provision here is that Clearview must end its practice of providing free trials to police officers if those individuals don't get approval through their departments to test the software. So I've been very aggressive with just marketing to individual police officers in different departments with free trials. And this is we've talked about Clearview a lot, and this is maybe the first major event in the US to curb its spread, following it being pretty much banned in different countries like Canada and Australia. So, yeah, good news.
And on to our lightning round. The first article is Justice Department and EEOC warn against disability discrimination. So the Department of Justice and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, today not today, sorry. And on to our lightning round. The first article is Justice Department and EEOC warn against disability discrimination. And so this is about these two departments in the government, the Department of Justice and the EEOC, which stands for Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, releasing a technical assistance document about disability discrimination when employers use AI and other software tools to make employment decisions. So it's a warning to start with.
Makes sense, yeah. If AI tools don't take the possibility of disability, that'll be a huge issue. So Good to see this. And our second lightning round story from a New Yorker, the Turkish drone that changed the nature of warfare. And it is talking about the Bayraktar TB2 that is now being used fairly extensively in Ukraine and also has been used in other countries, and has really, been fairly influential in the last few years since being developed. Especially it did get some prominence for Ukraine, with Turkey donating, I think, hundreds of them to the Ukrainian army. So a pretty good article just summarizing that topic. And on to our fun and neat stories. Starting off, we've got Kendrick Lamar uses deepfakes in latest music video. So Kendrick Lamar, for those who don't know, is possibly the best rapper of all time. He has been, universally recognized as sort of a genius in the past decade. And he just released a new album after a few years of being kind of off the grid. And for the song The Heart Part 5, he uses deepfake technology to morph his face into different Black celebrities such as Kanye West, Will Smith, and O.J. Simpson. So you can check out the video, just Google it, or just look it up on YouTube, The Heart Part 5. And it's fairly evident it's deepfakes, but it also is quite high quality, which was interesting to see.
Cool to see this going mainstream. Obviously, there are issues with deepfakes. This was created by a studio called Deep Voodoo, and obviously a very high-profile use of it. I do imagine that non-deepfake technology, but similar types of effects have been made before.
Yeah, I think this is probably a case where, as we've seen before, it's not just AI models. It's also sort of just standard computer graphics that help it be more seamless. And we've seen other high-profile applications, things like de-aging in Martin Scorsese's latest movie, things like face transfer for different movies. So computer graphics departments, special effects departments are using a lot of these sorts of things in various ways already. And this is maybe the latest example. And as you say, yeah, it's pretty high profile. There's already 26 million views and it is trending. So interesting to see this get more widespread, and you can go ahead and check it out. It's also a good song, I would say.
And on to our last article. We asked 100 humans to draw the DALL prompts. So this article is about grabbing some DALL generated images, generated by DALL 2 specifically, which was an open AI a model that goes from text that you can input to images that the model can then paint and draw for you in really, really high fidelity and doing really well. And now in this case, this company actually got some humans, to take the text that was inputted into DALL and draw what they thought they would see, and then give those pictures of real human drawings and also the fake DALL-E drawings to 100 different people to ask, which one is generated by AI, which one is by a human. And actually, it was quite challenging for people to detect. I will say myself, I could tell because I played with DALL-E a little bit too much. So I know a bit what to look for, but I don't think if they had refined things even further, I'm sure it would have been very, very challenging for me.
Yeah, it's quite fun to compare them. I think in a few cases I could tell pretty easily, especially with things like vector graphics, where it's very clean lines, very clean circles, very straight. That's something that things like DALL-E are still not quite good at. And there's also some MS Paint, super, super simple drawings that I don't know how much MS Paint there is in a training set of DALL-E. It's kind of funny. And but it's a lot of fun to see them side by side. And I actually do wish there was more of this sort of thing going on, just like comparing and seeing to what extent DALL-E can be made to match human drawings. If you can sort of reverse engineer DALL-E to generate something like a human drawing, it would be cool to see whether it can do that or if it has some limits. Any new DALL-E creations for you this last week, Sharon?
Oh, yes, always. I get a lot of prompt requests from friends, so I've been just making those for them.
Nice. Well, once again, check out Sharon's Twitter to see those.
Or just ask me for something. No, I'm kidding. I actually had a really fun request by a friend for Mother's Day for their mom, and they were so ecstatic, and the mom was so happy. That made me so happy. The mom actually thought it was commissioned by some artist.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. Very cool.
Very cool indeed. And you can actually feel free to email contact@lastweekin.ai. If you have requests, we would be happy to fulfill that for our listeners. So, think up a fun prompt and maybe we'll go for it.
And with that, thank you so much for listening to us on this week's episode of Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast. You can find the articles we discussed here today and subscribe to our weekly newsletter with similar ones at lastweekin.ai. Subscribe
to us if you're a new listener and just listen to this episode.
Subscribe.
And if you are subscribed, please do leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We haven't seen a new one in a few weeks, and we are always excited to see what people have to say. And actually,
so excited. We love it.
We love it. It's like, wow, actual people listen to this.
I know. It does. It makes a big difference.
It does. And
we talk about it all the time.
I just send Sharon screenshots and like, new review. Yeah. So definitely always exciting. But even if you don't review us, please tune in. Next week. We'll keep doing this, so don't worry.